The doctor is in. No religion allowed here, just grace and truth. You've entered the No Religion Zone with Pastor Greg Lilly.
Hey, you just entered the NRZ, the No Religion Zone. Get ready to be liberated. We are looking at the life of Jacob. And it starts with his grandfather, Abraham. God gave Abraham promises. This man's just walking one day, and he hears something from heaven. It's a voice. It just starts throwing out promises. And he believed everything he heard. And from that point on, God was making a covenant with Abraham. It was called the covenant of promise. If you go to Ephesians chapter 2, this is what you're going to see. Paul speaking. Remember that at that time, you were separate. He's talking to the Gentiles. You were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of promise, without hope and without God in the world. So there are about 7 to 9 covenants, and only one is conditional. The rest are unilateral, meaning that God deals with man on the basis of covenant. We'll say, well, then why did he in that one covenant make it conditional? To show man he can't live any other way but by the promises that God gives. Because man in the garden went to the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and it doesn't work. So God says the only way this thing's going to work is if you just let me give you promises and let me fulfill those promises. And all I need you to do is trust me to do what I promise. And that's the covenant that God makes with Abraham. That's the new covenant. And all the covenants was that way except one. Unilateral, meaning that it was one-sided. This is what I'm going to do, and you just sit back and let me do it. That's the kind of promise you're under, or covenant that you're under, a covenant of promise. Well, here comes the religious group in Galatia, and Paul is going to set the record straight. Galatians 3:18. For if the inheritance depends on the law, then it no longer depends on the promise, but God, in his grace, gave it to Abraham through a promise. Paul is saying the new covenant is like the Abrahamic covenant. It's a covenant of promise. The world knows nothing of this kind of covenant, because every book that's written in the world and in religion has you doing something. It's what do you mean? You got a brain, use it. You got talents and gifts. You've got everything. You could do it. Everybody has the ability to do this, that, or the other. You have an ability. You just got to make it happen. Then we go to all the motivational places, and we go to try to make something. You can't do it. You know, Paul says, I put no confidence in the flesh. What does that mean? In my ability to do. My call is to trust. Jeremiah will say, cursed is the man who puts his confidence in the arm of flesh. Some trust in chariots, some in horses. No. We trust in the Lord, who's faithful, who promised. Now, we looked at Jacob, and I didn't get through last week with Jacob. This is what God says to Jacob in Genesis 28:15. I'm just going to paraphrase it. He says, I am going to do everything I promised you, and I'm not going to leave you till it gets done. Not what I'm asking you to do and how many chances you're going to get before I'm just done with you and walk away. That'd be a covenant of works, performance. God says, I'm not looking for your performance. I'm not looking to how talented you are. I'm looking, do you believe what I promise? Because it's a covenant of promise. I did it with your grandfather, Abraham. I did it with your father, Isaac. And I'm doing it with you. So it's a covenant of promise. And so God's going to show him how it's done with a story that I didn't get to last week. Now, you know the story between Laban and Jacob. Laban is his uncle. He ran from Esau because he stole the birthright. And his mother says, go to my brother, and who's his uncle. And what you have here is two cheats working on each other, basically. And Laban changes his wages 10 times. And you know the thing that you can have Rachel, he works for 7 years. And the guy knew he wasn't going to give him Rachel. He wanted 14 years out of him and says, oh, I can't give you the youngest. The older has to get married first. And you know the story. This man's never going to get wealthy. He's never going to make enough money to leave working for Laban. So God gives him a vision. And you'll find this vision in chapter 31. I don't have time to go through these scriptures because we're working with a 28-minute segment here. So I got to hurry up. So you can read the story on your own, but I think you probably know it better than me. But what happens is God gives him a vision of this ram on these animals, and they're spotted and speckled and everything. They're conceiving and so forth and so on. And so he goes to his uncle and says, hey, if you let me have the spotted and speckled cattle, whatever, that'll be mine. Nobody wants them. And then you get all the other ones. And so he said, that's cool. So Laban has his sons gather up all the speckled and spotted and gives it to his sons. So when he comes to him to get there's none, so he has to produce them. Well, if there's none speckled. Now, if one's speckled and has, sexual relations with another one, more than likely it'll be speckled. But Laban took them all out. So he has nothing to work with. But he saw a vision of this. But what he ends up doing, he has to have a ways and means. So he gets these sticks and he stripes them so that when these non-speckled cattle, livestock, come together at the water trough where things happen while they're drinking, they're mating with each other, and they're looking at these sticks, and they're producing spotted calves, spotted animals, spotted and striped livestock. And man, he is making money hand over fist, right? So much so that Laban's son says he stole the wealth of our dad. So I want to ask you a question. Scientifically, this can't be done, right? Scientifically, this cannot be done. Come on, think about it. You're going to get a bunch of sticks and you're going to pull down the bark and stripe them however he did it, and then put these animals in front of it, and that's what they're going to produce, spotted and speckled livestock. Yeah, right? No. Now watch this. It happened because he saw it in a vision and he heard God say what he was going to do. And it defied all logic and science. Now how it happened? Just God made a promise in a vision. He didn't have to do that speckled thing with the sticks. That's him. Because Jacob, remember, hey, if you do God made a promise that he's not going to leave him until everything gets accomplished. So he has to come back and say, okay, if you do this, I'll give you 10%. God never asked for 10%. This is just Jacob. This is the character and the nature of Jacob right now. He's a heel catcher. Everything's transactional with him, and if he can't get it, he'll steal it. Right? That's just who he is, like it or lump it. That's just who he is. So God says, in spite of your character, and in spite of your ingenuity, and your ways and means, Jacob, of how you've tried to do it, it's not on you, buddy. I'm not asking you to do anything but trust me. And I know you're in a situation with your uncle, and you're never going to make enough money to get out of here. He's already changed your wages 10 times. I'm going to give you a vision. And all you got to do is believe it. And I'll make it happen. And that's exactly what happened. We get to see God in action after he tells him in Genesis chapter 28 that I'm not going to leave you alone till everything gets done. And wherever you go and whatever happens, I'm going to fulfill all those promises. You just got to believe it. And so we see him going off into his uncle and having that situation, and God delivering him from his uncle where he was able to make enough money to leave, right? So that is, why is it we have a hard time believing that God can do that with Abraham, and he can do that with Isaac? Remember Isaac? It's famine, and nobody sows in the land of famine, but Isaac is told not to go to Egypt, but to stay there and sow in the land of famine, and he gets 100-fold. Nobody gets 100-fold in a famine unless you live by promise. And promise will always defy science. What Abraham, you're going to be a father of many nations. I got a barren wife. There ain't nothing you can do about that. Nature can't fix that. You can't fix that. You're screwed from the get-go, buddy. But promise, God opens the womb. See, when God makes a promise, they're going to be pretty tall orders. So when I'm thinking about this, and I'm thinking about that scripture that God is able to do above and beyond what we can ask or think, according to what? How much you can obey? According to what? According to the power that worketh in you. The power of God. The power of promise. If God makes a promise, His divine power kicks in and defies all odds. And you get it by not working. What's Paul say in Romans 4? What did Abraham find concerning the flesh? That he didn't have to work for anything. And it was grace given to him freely without any work whatsoever. You find that in the first couple verses of Romans chapter 4. Check that out, if you will. But do you see what's happening here? Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. God is going to give them everything through the avenue of promise. Now, you and I, if we don't go this route, what's he saying in Ephesians 2 again? You are without hope. Because this whole thing's by promise. You guys, you Gentiles, have been trying to do this thing on your own. You were outside the covenant of promise. It was up to you. It was up to your ingenuity. It was up to how smart you were, your IQ. Do you realize that it doesn't matter what your IQ is? It doesn't matter what your skin color is. It doesn't matter what your gender is. It doesn't matter what side of the tracks you're born. All you got to do is have an ear to hear a promise, and God performs it. I mean to tell you, this is something we all need to rejoice over. This is good news. We are in a covenant of promise. And all we've got to do is have ears to hear what he's saying. And we'll try to develop that real quick here in a little bit. I'm going to leave that with you. Give you a little bit of exhortation here. God's promises are above and beyond what you can ask or think. Let's go back to Abraham. He knows his wife is barren. He knows it. They've been trying to have kids for a long time. So, where's his imagination end? By walking by sight. Barren, I'll never have. The only child I have is this slave kid. So when God says, I'm going to make you a father of many nations, it's not going to be according to anything that Abraham can do. It's going to be based on what God being faithful to his promise. Okay, go back to Isaac. Land of famine. You're screwed, buddy. You're screwed. It's over. You're going to be poor like everybody else. Nope. God's going to come through with a promise. And here we are with Jacob. All right, you're under a system, a welfare system called Laban. And he is going to screw you every single time. Maybe not a welfare system, but maybe a socialism system, a communism, or maybe crony capitalism. But you are getting screwed one way or the other. See, we find ourselves in a life of limitation because of our IQ. Maybe because we were born on the wrong side. Maybe we weren't what we thought we should be or have what we should have. We're limited by something. And God says, I am able to do above and beyond what you can even ask or even think. I always question that. How am I going to get above thinking to ask? I'm limited. I'm capped in my ability to even think of some things. If you ask me right now, what do you want? What do you want? I'm like, how? If the sky's the limit, I don't know if I have an imagination to go to the limit, beyond the limit. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be. So we don't. You know what we do? We start listening to promises. So let me ask you something. And then I'm going to give you a true story. But let me ask you this question. Now, this may challenge you. You may kick back at it, but listen to it. Think about it. A lot of people talking about revival. We want revival. We want revival. We talk about the Welsh revival, the Azusa Street revival, and all other different types of revivals that have come and gone. And every single one of those people will tell you what they had to do to get that revival. And it's usually different. I mean, there may be some commonalities there, but there's usually differences as well. But none of them that I know of said that it is by promise. What do you think it's by? If everything I'm saying is true, and we are in a covenant of promise, and God wants to send revival, and again, we can debate on what revival is and how it comes, and who can have it, who can't. I mean, here we go. I'm just trying to show you something here. I'm taking a general theme here, or topic, revival. How does it come? It's got to come like everything else. It's got to come through promise. If we're in a covenant of promise, what else is it going to do? All right, so I'm going to drop a bomb here on many of you. 2 Chronicles, 7:14. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, and I will hear them from heaven, and I will heal their land. Right? I'll forgive them their sins, heal their land, whatever. That's my paraphrase. So let's ask a question. What covenant was that made under? The only one that was conditional. All the other covenants are covenants of promise. They're unilateral. The only one that's not is the one that Scripture's found in. And that's the one we use for God to bring revival to America. For God to come and bless America again. This is what, can you imagine? You're going to get we're back to Nehemiah. Do you realize that Nehemiah had to get people in headlocks and pull on their hair after he rebuilt that wall, got it up, and they went back to sinning, which was the very reason why they lost the land in the first place. And he's like, you guys are making the same mistake again. And he did everything he could. He got them in read it. He got them in headlocks and pulled their hair, I tell you. It's amazing. But what is 2 Chronicles? You're going to get everybody in America to do that? If just one person doesn't do it, or if 2 people doesn't do it, or 20% of the people don't do it, what's the number, guys? What's the number? And they never tell you that number. What's the quota? How many do we have a prayer chain? How many got to be praying at the same time for God to do this thing? There's no name, because this is not how God operates. He doesn't do it by how much you fast, how much you pray. He does it based on you believing His promises. Paul says, did you start off in the Spirit? Now you're going to complete this thing in the flesh in Galatians chapter 3, the first couple verses there. He said, come on. And here's the kicker. Galatians 3:5. Did you receive the Spirit by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Does God work miracles among you? Does God work powerful feats among you? That's revival. And does He do it by the works of the law or by the hearing of faith? Promise. Believing the promise. And that's how He does it. So I'm going to leave you with a story. I got 10 minutes. I'm going to leave you with a story. This is a true story because it happened to me. I was an associate pastor of a church, one of the largest churches in our area, charismatic churches in our area. Well, actually in 3 cities around about, one of the largest churches. And so it was in the end of 1994, December, or it was January of 95, through there. I'm not 100% sure, but it was around that time. And I didn't go to bed that night, and I was up praying, and I was just fell asleep on the couch in the living room downstairs. And it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and I'm sound asleep. And I hear this audible voice. And I don't care whether you believe this or not. I will appear before God telling you what I'm about to tell you, if I'm lying. 1 o'clock in the morning, I woke up, and this is the first time, but 98 will be the second time I hear an audible voice sleeping. Now, is it audible in that if you were sitting there, would you hear it? I don't know that. I'm telling you, to me, in my ear, I hear you're going to be the next pastor of the name of this church. I got up, and you ever have your nerves shaking and you can't control. I'm just like, what was that? I'm going to be the next pastor of the church? I said, but the senior pastor whom we loved, I mean, one of the best men I've been under, I'm like, he's not going anywhere, Lord. So I'm like, I don't know what to do with that, but I know I heard. That's all I know. I could look at all the outward and go, doesn't look like it to me. But what had me get a grip of faith on that promise was I heard it. It woke me up. Well, I go to Cambodia about a month later for 3 weeks on a missions trip in Cambodia. We come back, and the senior pastor takes me out. He says, well, I hope I have time to finish this. He said, I'm leaving. And my jaw dropped. Now, he doesn't know, nobody knows that I got a word 2 months ago that I'm going to be the next pastor. And this guy, who no one even thought he was leaving, this was going to be a bomb dropped on the church, that he's leaving. And I'm sitting there, and he's telling me this, and I can't hear anything he's saying because I'm going, oh my God, it's happening. It's happening. And then he ends it by saying this. The elders don't want anybody, because we had a large staff, doesn't want anybody rising up among the ranks. So I thought, okay. So of course I'm not telling anybody what I heard. So I go home and I'm thinking, I know what you're telling me, that they don't want me. That was a nice way of saying they don't want me. I said, but God does. I know what I heard. And I'm telling you, that was like in March of 95. And so for 6 months, everything that leadership did was opposite of what I heard that night. And you want to talk about my faith, my hearing God taking a pounding. Everything they did was the opposite of what I heard that night. And all I kept saying is, I know that I heard God. I know that I heard God. You're not going to move me on this. And I hung in there, and I hung in there. And then they ended up getting this older man, his intern or whatever, and he worked out for 2 or 3 weeks, and he wanted the position. It was obvious. And I'm like, sorry, dude, I know I have a word, you don't. You got a word from them, I got a word from God. And then all of a sudden there was a couple pastors that I'm really good friends with in the area, and they're more qualified than me, better teachers than me. And they came and said, hey, would you mind if I put my hat my name in the hat? And I'm like, no, man, go for it. And that's fine, because I wasn't insecure. I heard God. And if I didn't and I messed up, hey, you know what? It is what it is. But I didn't have that mentality. I said, yeah, the more the merrier. Everybody put your name in the hat. I don't care. I heard. Did anybody get woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning and hear God say that? No, nobody did but one guy. 1,000 could put their name in the hats. And I promise you, only one heard something at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the rest of you didn't. So that's where my faith was. So from March to September of 95, now I did tell a few people, close friends. And so the looks I got, oh, you heard God? And I'm like, okay. Even my close friends don't believe it. So I thought, and maybe a few did, or hoped I heard that, because we all wanted the same thing. But I thought, I'm not telling anybody else. It doesn't matter. I know what I heard. I know what I heard. So I go on vacation, Myrtle Beach, for about a week, and I get a phone call while I'm on vacation from one of the elders. It says, hey, when you getting back? I said, what date? And they said, we want to meet with you. I'm getting back Saturday night. And they said, will you be in church Sunday? Yes. Said, we want to meet with you after church Sunday. And I'm like, okay. So I don't know what they're going to, I'm hoping they're going to make the right decision, or they may be telling me what they're going to do. I don't know. I've been gone. I was on vacation. I don't know what's been transpiring. So anyway, we get back, and So I go there, and they offer me the position. And so they took me out to eat and offered it to me. But anyway, I get home, and family says, "Hey, this is great, this is great, this is great." And I'm like, yeah. Listen to me. What I'm about to say, I'm telling you the God's truth. And I'm like, yeah. No, don't get me wrong. I'm happy that they chose me. But do you know what I was excited more about than anything? Was that I heard God. It legitimized my encounter. But here's why I'm telling you this. When God says you're going to be the next pastor, he was making a promise. And listen, it wasn't contingent upon me. They didn't want me. It wasn't contingent upon them because they already made their decision. They didn't want anybody in the staff to rise up from the ranks. So this is what God does. This was impossible. They didn't want me. Well, what's wrong with you that didn't want? I don't know. They claim, well, I was only like 30 years old. And maybe they thought I was too young or whatever. And maybe so. But my point is that God fulfills promises. And he gives you promises that defy the odds. Because the odds were against me. And what's funny was that the majority of the church wanted me to be the next pastor, and they were going and telling them and they were like, "That's not what we're doing. This is not what we're doing." So it didn't matter who was for me, it mattered on God who made the promise. So let me just end with this. I got 1 minute. Is that, guys, listen. This thing is a covenant of promise. We need to quit looking at what we can do, what the government can do, what the world can offer us. No. You'll limit God completely if you don't go to him and say, "God, give me the promises like Jacob. You're not going to give up on me. You're not going to leave me. You're not going to let me go till every promise that you have made to me gets fulfilled. Now, open my eyes to the promises that you have for me. And what I don't see and what I don't know and hear, I trust you somehow are going to fulfill this by a promise that you made I may not be privy to." So let me encourage you. Go to God and ask him. You're in a situation right now, ask him what promise to believe. Lord, give me a promise for this situation. Lord, give me a promise for that situation. Because this is a covenant of promise. Don't go to him, "Lord, what do I need to do to help? What do I need to do to..." No. Well, Lord, what promise is going to fix this marriage? What promise is going to give me this job? What promise is going to provide and heal me? Well, I'm out of time. Seek the Lord for promises and then entrust yourself to his faithfulness. I'll see you next week.
Thank you for tuning in to the NRZ. To contact us, go to our website at greglilly.com. And if God lays on your heart to give, according to Galatians 6:6, you can access the different ways you can give. That's greglilly.com.